He wanted to humiliate me. I let him destroy his own reputation. I stood at the edge of the rooftop terrace, the city lights stretching out before me, each glittering window and flashing billboard a reminder of the world I had chosen to reclaim. Behind me, the party buzzed with low laughter and clinking glasses, the air thick with perfume and whispered conversations. The kind of event where reputations were made and destroyed with a single misstep. I took a slow breath, letting the cool night air fill my lungs. My fingers curled loosely around the stem of my wine glass. My pulse steady, my heart calm. This was his world, the place where he had once thrived, where he had once tried to humiliate me, to shrink me, to make me feel small enough to fit inside the narrow space he had reserved for me in his life. But not anymore. I had survived him, had walked through the fire of his manipulation, had emerged stronger, smarter, unbreakable. And now, as I watched him move through the crowd, his laughter a little too loud, his smile a little too bright, his charm a little too forced, I felt the first flicker of satisfaction bloom in my chest. He had tried to destroy me, tried to chip away at my confidence, to undermine my worth, to twist my words into weapons he could use against me. But he had underestimated me. And tonight, as the whispers I had carefully set in motion began to spread through the room, as the cracks in his polished facade grew wider, as the friends he had once counted on began to pull back, their eyes narrowing, their smiles fading, I knew that the moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived. He wanted to humiliate me. Instead, he had destroyed himself. And as the night stretched on, as the music swelled, as the city lights flickered and danced in the darkness, I smiled, raised my glass, and let the truth do what it always does. Burn away everything that was never real. It started with a joke, the kind of offhand, seemingly harmless comment that slips into a conversation like a needle, sharp and unnoticed until you feel the sting. We had been at a friend's birthday party, surrounded by people I considered family, my laughter light and unguarded, my heart full in a way it hadn't been in a long time. I had just finished telling a story, something silly, something light, the kind of anecdote that usually drew a laugh from my friends. But as the chuckles died down, I felt his hand on my shoulder, his grip just a little too tight, his smile just a little too wide. "She loves to talk, doesn't she?" he said, his voice carrying just loud enough for the people around us to hear. His eyes locking with mine, sharp and unreadable. The room fell quiet for a beat, the awkward, uncertain kind of silence that stretches too thin, that makes people shift in their seats, that turns smiles into tight, uncomfortable lines. I felt my face flush, my pulse quicken, my mind scrambling to find the right response, to brush off his words as a harmless joke, to convince myself that I was being too sensitive, that I was overreacting. I forced a laugh, tried to catch his eye, tried to find some hint of warmth in his expression, some small, silent reassurance that he hadn't meant it the way it had sounded. But his smile didn't reach his eyes, and when he looked away, his hand slipping from my shoulder, I felt the first crack form in the foundation of our relationship, a tiny, hairline fracture that would only grow deeper over time. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself that it didn't matter, that it was just a joke, that I was being dramatic. But deep down, in the quiet corners of my mind, I felt the first stirrings of doubt, the first whisper that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the man I thought he was. And by the time I realized how deep that doubt had grown, it was already too late. It didn't stop with that first joke. If anything, it got worse. Once he realized I would laugh it off, smile through the discomfort, pretend his sharp words didn't cut as deeply as they did, he grew bolder. It started small. Tiny digs slipped into conversations with our friends, comments that could be brushed off as playful teasing if you weren't paying attention. "She's a bit of a control freak," he'd say, chuckling as he wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close, the perfect picture of a doting boyfriend to anyone watching. Or, "She has to win every argument. You should hear her when she really gets going." Sometimes he'd make a show of rolling his eyes when I spoke, leaning back in his chair, sighing dramatically, his body language a silent, exaggerated commentary on my words. At first, I convinced myself it was harmless, that he was just being playful, that I was being too sensitive, that I needed to lighten up, to stop taking everything so personally, to remember that relationships required a sense of humor. But the jokes grew sharper, the comments more pointed, the laughter less genuine. I started to notice the way our friends' eyes would flicker between us when he spoke, the small, sympathetic glances they would throw my way, the uncomfortable silences that would follow his barbed remarks. And still, I tried to play along, to smile, to laugh, to pretend that his words didn't sting, that his digs didn't feel like small, deliberate attempts to chip away at my confidence, to undermine me in front of the people who mattered most. But each comment, each sideways glance, each forced laugh left a mark, small at first, barely noticeable, but growing deeper with each passing day. And slowly, without even realizing it, I began to shrink, to doubt myself, to second-guess my every word, my every action, my every thought, and that, more than anything else, was the wound that would take the longest to heal. The public digs were bad enough, but it was the private manipulations that really broke me. The small, insidious ways he twisted my words, turned my fears against me, made me question my own reality. It always started the same way, with a quiet comment, a gentle correction, a small, seemingly innocent observation about my behavior. You're being dramatic. You're overthinking this. You're too sensitive. Why do you always have to make everything so complicated? At first, I would argue, try to defend myself, try to explain why his words hurt, why his jokes felt more like cuts than playful teasing. But he always found a way to turn it around, to twist my concerns into something petty, something irrational, something unworthy of the time it took to address them. He would sigh, roll his eyes, cross his arms over his chest, his entire body a wall of quiet dismissal, his face a mask of patient suffering as he waited for me to run out of steam. Sometimes, he would reach for my hand, his fingers cool against my skin, his eyes soft, his voice low and soothing. "I'm just trying to help you," he'd say, his thumb tracing small circles against my palm, his tone the perfect blend of concern and condescension. "I just want you to be a better version of yourself." And every time, without fail, I would feel the fight drain out of me, my words falling silent, my confidence crumbling beneath the weight of his carefully chosen lies. I began to question everything. My instincts, my memories, my ability to read a room, to trust my own thoughts, to believe in my own worth. He had convinced me that I was too emotional, too demanding, too much. And the worst part, I had believed him. I had let his words shape the way I saw myself, let his lies twist the way I moved through the world, let his manipulations carve away pieces of my self-worth, until I barely recognized the woman staring back at me in the mirror. But what he didn't know, what he hadn't counted on, was that I was still watching, still listening, still learning. And one day, when I had gathered enough strength, I would use his own words to destroy him. The first crack appeared on a Thursday. A small, almost imperceptible shift in the way he spoke to me, the way he carried himself, the way his eyes darted away when I asked a simple question. He had come home late, his tie loosened, his jacket slung carelessly over one shoulder, his phone clutched tightly in his free hand, his eyes already scanning the room as if he were calculating how much he could get away with. "Late meeting," he said, dropping his keys onto the side table by the door, his voice too bright, too casual. "Got caught up with a client. You know how it is." I forced a smile, leaned in for a quick kiss, and tried to ignore the faint trace of perfume clinging to his collar, the sharp, unfamiliar scent that felt like a slap against my skin. He slipped past me, disappearing into the bathroom without a second glance, the door clicking shut behind him, the lock sliding into place with a small, final snick. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing, my pulse thundering in my ears, 1,000 tiny doubts swirling together into a single, undeniable truth. He was hiding something. I waited until I heard the water running, the low, steady hum of the shower masking the soft creak of the bedroom door as I slipped inside. My eyes already locked on the jacket he had tossed carelessly onto the bed. I reached into the pocket, my fingers trembling, my breath catching in my throat as I felt the cool, smooth edge of a business card tucked into the fabric. I pulled it out slowly, my heart sinking as I read the neatly printed words, the unfamiliar name, the private phone number, the thin, careful handwriting scrawled across the back. "Had a great time last night. Call me soon. Elle." I felt the room tilt around me, the walls closing in, the air turning heavy and oppressive, my heart shattering into 1,000 tiny pieces as I stared down at the card in my shaking hand. He had lied to me. Again. And this time, there was no mistaking the truth. The cracks in his mask were growing wider. And this time, I was done pretending I couldn't see them. After I found the card, something inside me shifted. A quiet, subtle realignment of my priorities. A slow, steady pulling back of the threads that had once held my life so tightly intertwined with his. I stopped asking where he was going, stopped checking my phone for his messages, stopped trying to catch his eye when he walked into the room, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowed, his mind clearly elsewhere. Instead, I watched, listened, learned. I became a ghost in my own life, slipping through the rooms of our shared apartment like a shadow, my presence so quiet, so unobtrusive, that he barely seemed to notice me anymore. I started keeping track, not just of his late nights and whispered phone calls, but of the smaller, quieter lies he told, the ones he thought I was too blind to see. The way he would smile at me just a little too brightly when I asked how his day had been, his words too polished, too rehearsed, too careful. The way he would drop my hand at parties, leaning a little too close to the woman beside him, his eyes lingering a little too long, his laugh a little too loud. The way he would sigh when I spoke, his fingers tightening around his glass, his jaw clenching as if my voice were a weight he could no longer bear. I stopped confronting him, stopped arguing, stopped trying to defend myself against the subtle, cutting comments he slipped into our conversations, the small, quiet ways he tried to chip away at my confidence, to make me feel small, to make me doubt my own worth. Instead, I let him think he was winning, let him believe I was still the quiet, compliant woman he had molded me into, the woman who would smile through the pain, who would laugh off his barbed jokes, who would swallow her pride for the sake of keeping the peace. But inside, I was already pulling away, already untangling myself from the life we had built, already planning my exit, already building a future without him. And the best part, he had no idea. Once I stopped trying to confront him, everything became clearer. I had been too focused on winning arguments, on defending myself, on proving my worth to a man who had never truly valued me. But now, I saw the game for what it was, a twisted, self-serving performance, designed to keep me off balance, to make me doubt myself, to keep me questioning my own instincts. So I stopped playing by his rules. I became an observer in my own life, quietly collecting the pieces of his lies, building a case against him one small, deliberate act at a time. I started with his phone, not by snooping, not at first. I simply watched, noticed the way he angled the screen away from me at dinner, the way he always kept it face down on the table, the way he never seemed to let it out of his sight, even when we were alone. I paid attention to his schedule, the late nights he claimed were for work, the weekend trips he swore were necessary, the dinners with clients he had never bothered to introduce me to. I checked his social media, not the polished profiles he shared publicly, but the private ones, the accounts he had forgotten to hide from me, the ones filled with likes and comments from women whose names I had never heard, whose faces I had never seen. I found messages, photos, inside jokes that cut deeper than any argument we had ever had, tiny, casual betrayals that felt like 100 small blades slicing into my heart. I took screenshots, saved emails, kept notes, built a timeline that stretched back further than I had dared to imagine, a record of every lie he had ever told, every moment he had chosen someone else over the woman he had once promised to love. And slowly, the picture came into focus, the life he had built behind my back, the carefully constructed web of deceit he had woven around us, each thread another crack in the foundation of our relationship. He had underestimated me, thought I was too trusting, too naive, too afraid of being alone to ever question his loyalty. But he was wrong, and when the time came to confront him, I wouldn't just have my voice, I would have the truth, and it would be undeniable. I wasn't alone. I hadn't realized it at first, too wrapped up in my own pain, too focused on his lies, too consumed by the slow, steady unraveling of my own self-worth. But as I pulled back, as I stopped trying to win his approval, as I quietly reclaimed my power, I started to notice the small, silent gestures of support around me. The first hint came from a mutual friend, someone I hadn't seen in months, someone who had once been a regular presence in our lives, but had slowly drifted away. Her bright, easy smile replaced by a tight, wary expression whenever his name came up. We ran into each other at a coffee shop, her eyes widening in surprise as I approached, her arms wrapping around me in a tight, too long hug that felt like a silent apology. We sat together at a small corner table, our cups of coffee growing cold as we caught up, our conversations skirting around the edges of my relationship, both of us too cautious, too uncertain to address the elephant in the room. Finally, she set her cup down, her fingers trembling slightly against the ceramic, her eyes locking with mine. "I don't want to overstep," she said, her voice low, her gaze steady. "But Is everything okay with you too? I felt my heart skip a beat, my mind racing as I tried to find the right words, the right lie, the right excuse. But for the first time in a long time, I chose honesty. No, I said, my voice a little too loud, a little too raw, the truth catching in my throat like a jagged piece of glass. No, it's not. She reached for my hand, her fingers warm against mine, her grip strong and steady, and I felt the first crack in the wall I had built around myself. The first hint of light slipping through the darkness. You're not alone, she whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You never were. You just didn't know it. And as I sat there, my heart racing, my pulse thundering in my ears, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to face this fight alone. The opportunity to set the trap came sooner than I expected. It started with an invitation, a work event he insisted I attend, his voice dripping with the kind of forced enthusiasm that made my skin crawl. It'll be good for us, he said, leaning against the kitchen counter, his eyes sharp, his smile a little too wide. You can meet some of my colleagues, see the world I'm building for us. The world he was building for us. I almost laughed, almost rolled my eyes, almost let the bitter, cutting words I had been holding back slip from my tongue. But instead, I smiled, nodded, agreed to play the part one last time. He had no idea what I had been building, no idea that the threads of his carefully curated life were already unraveling, no idea that the woman he had spent years trying to diminish, to control, to silence, had already reclaimed her voice, her power, her worth. I chose my dress carefully that night. Something simple, elegant, powerful, a deep, rich color that clung to my curves, that made me feel strong, unbreakable, a statement piece, a silent declaration of war. When we arrived, the room was already buzzing, the air thick with the low hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, the soft rustle of expensive fabric. He moved through the crowd like a king, his hand on my back, his smile wide, his voice carrying over the low music, drawing eyes and admiring glances from all sides. I stayed close, leaned into his touch, smiled when he introduced me to his colleagues, played the part of the supportive girlfriend with a grace I had long since perfected. But behind the scenes, I was already setting the pieces in motion. A few quiet words to the right people, a few carefully chosen hints dropped into conversations, a few small, seemingly innocent revelations whispered into the ears of his closest allies. And as the night wore on, as the wine flowed and the laughter grew louder, I felt the first cracks begin to form in his carefully constructed facade. The first small, quiet shifts in the room that told me the trap was set. He had walked right into it, and he had no idea. It started small, the way most downfalls do. A few sideways glances, a couple of forced, awkward silences, the kind of careful, measured conversations people have when they're trying to process new information without revealing what they know. I watched it all from the sidelines, my glass of champagne cool in my hand, my pulse steady, my heart calm, the chaos around me feeling strangely satisfying, like the first cool breeze after a long, suffocating summer. It began with his friends, the ones who had once laughed at his jokes, clapped him on the back, raised their glasses to his successes without a second thought. They started pulling back, their smiles a little too tight, their conversations a little too forced, their eyes avoiding his when he walked into the room. I could see the confusion on his face, the small, subtle flickers of uncertainty that passed across his features when someone turned away a little too quickly, when a laugh cut off a little too sharply, when a conversation shifted to a safer, less personal topic the moment he approached. He tried to brush it off, to force his way back into the center of the room, to reclaim the spotlight he had once commanded so easily. But you can't charm people forever. Not when the cracks have already started to show. Not when the whispers have already begun to spread. Not when the people who once adored you are beginning to see you for who you really are. I felt a small, sharp thrill as I watched him struggle, his smile growing tighter, his laugh a little too loud, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. He had thought he could control me, thought he could diminish me, thought he could erase my worth with his careless lies and whispered betrayals. But he had underestimated me, underestimated my strength, underestimated my ability to stand back, to watch, to wait, to strike when the time was right. And now, as the room around him grew colder, as the whispers grew louder, as the carefully constructed mask he had worn for so long began to crack, I felt the first flicker of satisfaction bloom in my chest. He had wanted to humiliate me. Instead, he had destroyed himself, I didn't leave in a rush. There was no dramatic exit. No shattered glass or slammed doors. No shouting match on the front steps. Just the slow, steady process of untangling my life from his, piece by piece, thread by thread, until there was nothing left to hold me in place. I started small. Stopped waiting for him to come home before making dinner. Stopped checking my phone for his messages. Stopped forcing myself to laugh at his jokes, to nod along with his stories, to play the part of the supportive girlfriend he had taken for granted for so long. I bagged up the clothes he had bought me, the ones he had insisted I wear to his work events, the ones that made me feel small, uncomfortable, like a prop in a life that had never really been mine. I took down the photos that lined our hallway, the carefully curated snapshots of a life I had once believed was real. I packed them into a box, slid it into the back of my closet, shut the door, and never looked at them again. I even stopped asking him how his day had been, stopped pretending to care about the small, mundane details of his life, stopped offering the silent, unspoken support he had come to expect without question. And slowly, day by day, the distance between us grew. He noticed. Of course he did. Men like him always do. But only when the power they have so carefully cultivated begins to slip through their fingers. Only when the control they have taken for granted starts to waver. He tried to pull me back. Tried to charm me. To coax me. To sweet-talk me into slipping back into the role I had once played so willingly. But I was done pretending. Done playing along. Done making myself small for the sake of his ego. When the day finally came, I walked out the door with my head held high, my shoulders back, my heart steady in my chest. I didn't look back, not even when I reached the curb, my suitcase bumping against my ankle, the weight of my keys still warm in my hand. I dropped them on the doorstep without a second thought, the metal clinking against the concrete, the final, satisfying note in a song I had stopped singing a long time ago. And as I stepped into the waiting car, I felt the first breath of real freedom fill my lungs. I had walked away, and I would never ever look back. The days that followed felt like waking up from a long, heavy dream. I moved into my new apartment slowly, unpacking one box at a time, letting each small, deliberate choice feel like a declaration of freedom. I hung my own art, painted the walls colors he would have hated, filled the shelves with books I had once set aside, too busy pretending to share his interests to remember my own. I stopped checking my phone for his messages, stopped looking over my shoulder for his shadow, stopped measuring my worth by the reflection I saw in his eyes. I took myself to dinner, sat at the bar, ordered the wine I liked, chose the meal I wanted, let the sound of clinking glasses and quiet conversation wash over me like a warm, steady tide. I reconnected with old friends, women who had known me before I had twisted myself into the version of myself he had once demanded, women who had waited patiently for me to remember who I was, who I had always been, who I would always be, with or without him. I laughed more, breathed deeper, felt the tightness in my chest ease as the days stretched into weeks, each one a little lighter than the last, each one a little more my own. I even started dating again, not because I needed someone else to complete me, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to be seen, to be valued, to be chosen for exactly who I was. And slowly, the sharp, stinging ache of his betrayal faded, replaced by a quiet, steady certainty that I was enough, that I had always been enough, that his inability to see my worth had never been a reflection of my value, but a testament to his own blindness. I had lost him, but in doing so, I had found myself again. And as I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, the city lights stretching out before me like 1,000 tiny stars, I felt the first real smile I had known in months spread across my lips. I was whole. I was free. I was unbreakable. And he was nothing more than a lesson I had already learned.
Thanks so much for watching. If you love a good revenge story, or if you've ever dreamed of getting the last word without saying much at all, you're in the right place. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new savage ending. Because around here, karma always hits different.